My mom told me I was born late, so I'm sorry I'm late. uh, happy Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope you all had a good month since the last time we seen each other, talked, whatever. Let's start out today. Shh. That's my ferocious puppy. I want to start today talking a little bit. I know everyone out there obsesses on volume. I obsess on volume because I think you got the average customer is missing a lot on their surfboard design by focusing just on the volume. I'll probably repeat myself a few times, but working with like Kyle Abelli and Wade Carmichael, especially Kyle, he, I always kind of poo-poo a half a liter. He insists that he can fill a half liter. And I said, yeah, what about a quarter liter? And he goes, yeah. And I go, are you sure that's about a half a cup? But but if you're a pro and you get 100 boards a year, you're top pro, I'll give you that. You can fill a half liter. If you're a lighter surfer and you're very advanced, maybe a half a liter. But, if you're intermediate plus, intermediate, you're not going to fill a half liter. You're probably not going to fill 2 liters, yes, maybe a liter. A liter, probably not. And that's on a short board. I mean, this is, the pros, they know their volumes on their short boards. But as soon as we start creeping up the ladder, they go, well, I need a little bit more volume. And I go, well, do you have a number? And they go, well, no, not really. So I want you to imagine 3 identical surfboards. Outline is the same, thickness is the same, volume is the same. If I change the rocker on those boards as much as a quarter of an inch, it's going to affect the way the board paddles, the way the board catches waves, and the way the board rides the waves. And so when you're ordering, I'm probably opening a can of worms here, but when you're ordering a board, give me, I design them all, give me a little latitude, like a range of volume you want. And I will, on a typical 6.0 SD, I might do 4.6 inches of rocker in the nose and 1.4 a foot back, and maybe 2.15, 2.2 in the tail, and 0.95 a foot up. But I'll change it. If you're surfing mainly hollower waves, better waves, might not necessarily add more nose rocker, but I'll add a little bit more tail rocker. Kyle rides a 5'9". He knows his dimensions: 18 3/8, 24.8 liters. Round tails, not round pins, not squash tails, round tails. But one thing, before I started working with him, I would have considered 2.38, 2.4 inches of tail rocker on a 5'9" as ridiculous. It's just, I've always, for the most part, been pretty conservative. I'm not going to say a flatter rocker, but I've always leaned a little bit more on the conservative side. But working, so I started working with Wade about 1.5 years ago. He too, the keg, 5'11", and 2.35 inches of tail rocker and almost 5 inches of nose rocker. But he's come down on the nose rocker a little bit. But Kyle, I think he rides the most rocker, and he's pretty set on it. His bottom's a lot flatter. I'm going to introduce some new things for you guys to think about. But when I talk about bottoms, I talk about plus, minus. Plus is a convex. It's a V. It's where the spine is higher than the rail, And the general scale I use is 0 to 0.1 is shallow, and then medium is 0.1 to 0.2, and high or extreme or whatever is 0.2, maybe 0.25 to 3.35. I'm not sure I've done some concaves about 0.33. So in my board descriptions, I'm going to be updating a lot of them. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the bottoms and the bottom transitions. So, if you see a board that's got, like Kyle's boards are, single to double, and they start, the midsection's about 0.1, and they only get to 0.16 or 0.18 at the deepest. Wade's boards are, the concave starts way in front of center, and as it passes through center, it's already 0.3. And when it gets, I call it the sweet spot, which is kind of between your feet. It's like usually about a third of the way up from the tail. And I think most shapers will tend to agree. Some boards have small sweet spots, some have bigger sweet spots, but Wade's sweet spot is about 0.33, and it's a single concave. So it's quite deep, and recently I've started developing a new model. I like short names. What ? I don't know. They couldn't come up with a name, so I call it what. But my thoughts were is have the concave deepest just in front of center, and a fairly deep concave, like 0.3 plus, and that runs back in through the sweet section at about 0.25, and then finishes the tail. I pretty much always finish the tails with the last 3 inches with a slight V, kind of almost a rounded V. That's to help smooth out the transitions between turns, finish turns cleaner. But so back to concaves, and you're going to start seeing more in the board descriptions, me addressing the depth of the concave or the V. But yeah, if you're I've had some guys say they're pros, but they surf once a year. I have to take that with a grain of salt, but if you're truly an advanced surfer, still give me a little slack on the volume. And when you're custom ordering a board, I will always gravitate towards the volume unless I feel the thickness is way off. And so if you give me 2 numbers, like you want a board 2.85 thick, but you only want 28 liters, I can't do it. So when you're custom ordering a board, you have to understand that I can fudge a little bit. I can thicken the rails up, I can thin them out, I can make the foil a little bit fuller, but for the most part, when you're custom ordering a board, just be aware that, and even as time goes by, the tables that we have, the stock dimensions, they get changed from time to time. As the board evolves, we get constantly getting feedback on designs, and making little changes, and don't freak out if I'm off a little bit on your thickness or your volume. And once again, I'll probably try to lean towards volume, since that's what everybody's kind of tripping on these days. So I've got let me see, I've got some questions. I've got Carter here with me today. Carter is new to the, is that you?
That's me.
He's new to the family. He's in charge of marketing and social media and videos and stills and stuff. He's great. And he's joining me today. He's got some questions. like,
If you're talking about liters, there's one that says, when looking to order a step up, is there a volume increase calculation to know what to get?
right, let me see. What is that? Where is that?
It's about the 10th question down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The question is, when looking to order a step up, is there a volume increase calculation to know what to get? Like I said, maybe the top pros might have an idea of what they want for the volume on their next one up, but they're not as firm as they are about their everyday board. And as you go up the ladder, they leave it more and more to me, and they know the width approximately. They don't even know the width on boards over 7 foot or 7'6", but they have a rough idea of the width and a rough idea of the thickness. And once again, the more board I have to work with, the more I can fool around to get a particular volume. So with the step ups, if it's a 2-inch jump, maybe a liter. I take that back. About 1.5 liters, maybe 2 liters. Because you need, you want a board for bigger waves. I think you want a board that paddles better, and gets in a little bit earlier. But then as you go up to like a 6-inch difference or an 8-inch difference, it's, you have to trust me. I take it up, but I don't really have a percentage.
Pedro's saying to talk about the pro dimensions, I think.
Oh, yes, yeah. And you'll see on the website in the next 3 to 6 months, we'll have, several of the models will have like a pro dimension, if you want to choose from that one, or it'll have a stock or, average Joe, I don't know, user-friendly dimensions. And like, for example, the SD is a board that I made for the Stab in the Dark a few years ago when Dane Reynolds was in South Africa. And I made the board, for Dane's weight and everything. And, it was 18 3/4 or 7/8 and 2.35 thick. I just felt, over time that, the average person orders the board a little bit wider, a little bit thicker. So what I'm saying is, we'll have average dimensions, and then we'll have pro dimensions. And the average dimensions will be, 1/2 inch. Like you'll see, the SD is the first one we're going to do it with. You'll see the average dimensions are more user-friendly for the average surfer. And they're about a 1/2 inch, 5/8 of an inch wider, and 1/8 to 3/16 thicker, and a couple liters more volume. And there's a couple of other shapers that already do that on their website, and I think it's a good idea, really. And once again, when you're doing a custom, you're not stuck to the stock dims. But we'll be offering pro dims and what's a good word for average Joe?
Yeah, average Joe.
No, somebody else uses that. What else you got here? Is there any way to reverse the yellowing of a surfboard? I don't think so. Polyurethane foam tends to yellow. Over time it turns yellow. It even turns like light brown, and that's partially due to the resin, but it's more to do with the foam. EPS, when Clark Foam closed in 2000, Christmas of 2005, You know, I was in a mad scramble to source EPS foam and good epoxy resin, and uh, you know, the first batch of boards that went out to shops, they were game to try EPS, but you know, within less than a month, they were complaining about how quick the boards were turning yellow. Um, it's not the EPS foam; it was the early epoxies, and since then, surfboard-specific epoxies have been developed that are very white, bright, clear, and you would these days you probably have less. You do have less yellowing with the newer epoxy resins. If you do an e-poly, the board might yellow a little bit over time, but if you do you know, PUPE, a polyurethane polyester resin, it'll yellow over time. I mean, I've got a gun that Dick Brewer shaped me. I don't know, about 10 years ago, and I've never ridden it. It's like a 10.6. It's sitting in my factory, and you know, it's polyurethane polyester, and it's never been out in the sun, but over time it's turned yellow. So it's just you know, it depends on the materials. Any another question?
How do I find the right size board for me? Kind of goes along the same lines of the volume.
How do I find the right size board for me? Well, if you've been surfing for a while and surfing on a regular basis, you'll have a general idea. Where I run into problems is surfers that, well, bigger surfers. I had a fellow that weighed 240 pounds, and he was in Texas, and he wanted a 5.8 Niso with 27 liters, 240 pounds. Wade Carmichael's a touch over 200. He rides 31 to 32 liters. So, yeah, if you're a little less experienced, you should listen to me, I guess. I don't know. I've done over 100,000 boards, so. But generally, the less you get to surf, and the I don't want to say weaker, but the fewer skills you have, you should probably consider getting a bigger board. And if you're like coming off of a wave storm or something like that, most of those boards are 8 foot, 8.6, and you want to get right on a 6.2 SD. No, no, you're going to be miserable. You're not going to catch waves. You're not going to make waves. You should come down slowly. From an 8 foot wave storm, maybe I say 6 inches at a time. But if you come down off a foamy board into a hard board, it's going to be a world of difference anyways. It'll be hard to get used to for a little while, but once you get used to it, considering taking smaller steps. I think even a foot, when you're coming down in size, even a foot is too much. And you can always keep that transition board, forever for smaller days. Most of the time the surf is pretty average, and you need a board for smaller average days. And I've seen a trend in the last couple of years that more and more surfers are realizing that although they want to surf like Garo Medina or whatever, Kyle Belly, they're not going to be able to, and they're realizing that they need a little bit more foam. And we've had some alternative boards in the past, but there's been kind of a big jump between a high performance short board and the alternative boards in terms of like size, length, and volume. We're working on a couple of boards that are just I don't know what to call them, step downs or something, that are basically a high performance short board but puffed up. The template's puffed up maybe a half inch, 3/4 inch in the center, maybe an inch in the nose, and not really that much in the tail. And the wide point creeps more towards center. Entry's relaxed, but good tail rocker. And those will be coming along too. Rhino Chaser. What would be a good generic size for a 6'3" newbie? Well, I mean, I've got guys that are 6'3" and 165 pounds, and I've got guys that are 6'3" and 240 pounds. So a big part is the weight. But if you're a newbie, more board within reason is better. And like I said, you can keep that transition board the rest of your career, as long as you surf for, bust it out on the small days, or even just to mix things up. I always, in the early days of my surfing, I tried as many boards as I could, and I was bigger. I was a big guy, and so it was kind of hard for me to find other boards to try. But whenever I, found something that I could paddle reasonably, I'd try it. And every shaper's got his vibe, and I was always interested in. In the early days, I got boards from Skip Fry and Mike Eaton. I got a Bonzer from Mike Eaton in 1972, I think. And on, like a lot of guys that were the better shapers back in the day. And, I always found, some boards had more strong points than others. Some boards hardly had any, but, And when you're ordering a new board, too, if it's your first miso, give me a little bit of latitude in designing it for you, because it's, unless you've ridden a miso and you want something identical, you're not really going to have a strong base of reference like a pro surfer that gets 100 boards a year. And even the pro surfers are I got a couple of stories. I think I've told this one before, but Mitch Thorson, who was in the early '80s, he was a top West Australian pro, but he was in the rank in the top 16. Very powerful surfer, but he was a thinker, kind of. And like I've told the story about Sean Thompson, the board feels really good, but so I started calling the boards I made for Sean butt boards. But Mitch was kind of the same. He said, well, I think if you change this and change that. And so I made Mitch a board, and I wrote the dimensions that he wanted on it, but I shaped it with my dimensions. And he came back and he said, man, that's the best board you've ever made me. So, and Josh Kerr, when he wrote for us, this is a couple of years ago, he calls me and he goes, man, I just wrote the best board ever, I think. And I go, really? Who shaped it? And he goes, you did. And I go, really? When? And he goes, 2 years ago. It's been sitting in my garage unridden for 2 years. And I think it's the best board you've ever made me. So, I forget where I was going with that, but generic size for a newbie. Yeah, I think, if you're going to err on the bigger side, and you'll have more fun, because for face it, most of us, surfing's fun. It's a pastime, and the more waves you catch, I think the more fun you have. Most guys paddle out these days on their undersized, under-volume board and catch 3 waves a session, probably make one of them. And, if they just realize that if they scaled up 3 to 5 liters and a little bit more width, maybe a touch more length, you'll have a much better time. Do you still produce torsion models? The torsion models, the unique thing about them was the foam. You have EPS, which is expanded polystyrene. The beads are expanded, and they seal with each other, and to varying degrees. Some of the early EPS was lightly fused, and it soaked water like a sponge. More contemporary EPS, surfboard specific, they're now being made in molds like the PU blanks, and they have much tighter fusion. The XPS, extruded polystyrene, is it's more of a liquid that is it's been used in the building industry forever. It's usually blue. Dow usually makes it blue. And if you want to get some white extruded polystyrene, I think the minimum order from Dow is 400 grand. So the extruded foam is basically waterproof, and it's got great flex. It's got very quick, lively flex. You have to glass it properly. You have to vent it. Javier from XTR Surfboards or whatever, I think he's patented a venting system. They do have to be vented because they off gas, and they will bubble unless they're vented. And so we had a source overseas we were getting the XPS from, and because of the COVID thing, it dried up, and so we ran out of blanks, and we're saying we're not sure when, but but the minimum order from them is quite large too. So we made a decision recently that we're going to move away from XPS. We're going to offer a new type of construction called the C-Rod. It's a carbon tubing, like 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch in diameter, extruded carbon, and there are little rods that we place along the rails, and maybe a thicker one down the middle on a stringless blank. It can be PU, it can be EPS, and we're in the early testing stages, but the feedback's been insane. It's not going to be as waterproof as the torsions if they're if they're glassed properly, but they have amazing flex, and so we're working. We're finished with the torsion spring, and we still get people that want them, but we do have a newer technology that we're working on. What was my first board? Tell you the first time I surfed was 1966. I didn't really surf. I was living in Sarah Mesa. My friend Billy Page, his father, used to take Billy to the beach, and Billy could surf a little bit. And he said, "Hey, come on, you should try it." And so I got the board, and I was pushing it out kind of sideways, and I got the thing right in my face. And it happens to most people the first time they take a board out of the water. But I said, fuck that, I'm over this. And then we moved to La Jolla, I think later in '66, and I was body surfing, but I was always conscious that the surfers were the cooler dudes. And so I bought, I think I was like late 14, maybe early, just turned maybe 14, and I got a asymmetrical board, all the rage these days. I got a used Carl Ekstrom asymmetrical board, and little did I know it was made for a regular foot, and I started my surfing career as a goofy foot, but it didn't matter. It's a kook. But my first custom board in early 67, mid-67, was La Jolla Surfboard's twin pin. And at the time, David Nueva was all the buzz, and I was seriously considering a Nueva lightweight. I think it was Bing, because everybody had them. But the Miranda brothers were in La Jolla, and all the really good some good surfers in La Jolla back in the day. They were running surfboards La Jolla, and in '67 they came out with they had a I think it's called a superboard. Before that, there was a swallowtail, but it was a single fin. But then they came out with a board. My first custom was an 810, kind of still longboardy, but it had a deep swallow, and it had a V running off of each swallow, and then each V panel, the outer V panel, had a fin, and it was like a fin that was bigger at the top, and it was at the small, and then it was at the base, and so technically my first real board was a twin fin in '67. So I've got 54 years of experience with twin fins. And my next board, that was an 810, and then my next boards, my next board was in early 68 or 68, and it was a smaller twin pin, about 7.6, much lighter, but rounder bottom. My skills were developing, and I could tell that this board wasn't a good board. The first one was. It was good for me at my level, but the second one wasn't really happening. But budget-wise, I was stuck on it for about 6 or 9 months, and then I took my stab at the first board I shaped in late summer of '69. Dan Evans, who was a local builder, he kind of helped me through it, helped me shape it, and helped me glass it, and we made custom fins. Because there's other experimentation going on with twin fins at that time, but they're, basically tall surfboard fins stuck right on the tail block of a big, blank that was, 2 feet was cut off the tail. They're pretty awful, but the board that Dan and I made was a little bit more fine tuned. It was still kind of the full nose and the full tail, but I made more fish-like fins, a bigger base, shallower, and that board rode good. I mean, for my skill level at the time, and I was starting to become a decent surfer, that board worked good. So I mean, my first 3 boards were twin fins, and then I think Gary Goodrum won the U.S. title in '71 on a twin fin. But they've resurfaced. I had a great local surfer, Henry Hester, in the late '70s. Is a top skateboarder, but he's also a very good surfer. He competed on an asymmetrical twin fin in the late '70s. So, and then around 1980, I was shaping for Canyon, and Sean Thompson asked if we'd make his boards here in the States. Yeah, that guy was the best surfer on the planet at the time. So I learned a lot about twin fins from Sean. I mean, and the things that I learned most of the things I learned still stand today in the designs I make. And I continue to make twin fins on and off through the decades. Josh Kerr, we got him on twin fins 6, 7, 8 years ago, and he loved them, and now it's all the rage. But and people are going, well, can I get something besides a fishy shape? Can I get a board with a progressive outline? I go, well, yeah, I've been making those for 40 plus years. So, but the twin fins are great. And people say, well, they spin out. They don't. If you build them right, if you position the fins right. I put my fins a little bit farther back than most people, I think, and I put them a little farther in from the rail. And if you do that, you get the angles right. The board, footage of Josh riding a twin fin in Indo somewhere on a solid 6-7 foot barrel. And I used to go to Hawaii a lot and shape there in the winters. And I think it was the winter of '79. I was at a pretty good size, pretty darn good Lani Kea, like 6-8 foot Hawaiian maybe. And Mark Richards was out. He was out on a little bit longer twin fin, and for a long time, there's an image in my mind of Barry Kanaiapuni at sunset, laying his 17.5-inch wide single fin on a rail, completely buried from nose to tail. It's a classic photo, but MR was out, and he was on a slightly longer twin fin. And he'd catch the biggest waves, he'd go down to the bottom and even fade a little bit and lay the thing over, had the rail buried from nose to tail, and he'd come flying out of the turns, didn't skip, didn't miss a beat on a twin fin. So they hold, they if they're built properly, they hold. What else you got for me?
Someone's asking, if you could go back and give your 30-year-old self one board to ride for, say, a decade, what would it be? It's from Naked Viking Surf.
Well, the Desert Island is a board, and I've told this story before, maybe a couple of times, but, one day the cove was breaking, beautiful day in January, and the cove was pretty big. And the cove is, it moves around a bit. It's a hard wave to catch, so you kind of need a lot of board. But once you catch it, it kind of turns into a mush ball. And I didn't really have a gun with me. And, So I went out and I caught some waves on not like a step up board. But I was thinking about it, I go, yeah, what's a one board does it all? And so I started building. They're a little bit longer. They're not a gun, but they're not really a fun board. But it's a bigger board with a fuller outline and fuller thickness, and I call it the Desert Island. It's still really popular. So I'd have to say maybe it would be a forefin, definitely. Um, I'm a big fan of EPS. Jamie Sterling and Garrett McNamara and a few other of my big wave guys, believe it or not, they use EPS in their guns, 9-foot, 10-foot guns. You just have to glass them heavier. So it'd be EPS, it'd be forefin, and it'd probably be kind of a desert island shape. Something cruise in small ways, something would handle bigger ways. It wouldn't really shine in any particular surf. Maybe a decent swell like a four, for here, for 4, 5, 6-foot swell. It would work good, but it wouldn't be ideal. But yeah, one board, and that's the thing too. If you're serious about your surfing, you should probably start thinking about building a quiver. Start with, your everyday board, and probably the next board you should probably get is a groveler, small wave board, and then the next board you should probably use a step up that's 3 or 4 inches longer that'll help you out in the bigger days, and then start building your quiver upwards, and then mid-length boards.
Can you go over some of the models that would fill those quiver categories, like the groveler, your everyday board, like if someone's looking to build their quiver?
Yeah, we've had. The Dwart is probably, the Prana was insanely successful, and the Dwart is right there. The Dwart was actually designed by Rick Hammond, and it was a fish, and it was in the outgoing rack to get, go next door to get glassed, and somebody bumped it and knocked one of the swallowtails off of it. So it sat for a while, and then Rick salvaged it by putting a double wing roundtail on it and glassed it. We let somebody ride it, and they freaked. So a couple more, and thus the Dwart was born. And still to this day, it's been around for, 15, 20 years. Still to this day, it's probably one of our most popular boards. So the Dwart and like the Hustler and the Heckler, the fuller outlines, kind of the fuller rails, and fuller rails. A lot of people go, I can't really put them in the water, and it depends on how it's made. And my fuller rails, they're not. About midway up, they don't bulge as much as a lot of fuller rails do. They're kind of almost angular. But that way you can kind of get part of the rail in the water easy, and then it comes out of the water quickly. And yeah, so we've had quite a few of those. Excuse me. Most of our alternative boards kind of fit that. The Hatchet, the 419, and Fish Quattro, the Hustler, Moby Fish, which is typically a bigger board, the Heckler, and so on. So that's kind of maybe your second board. And then your third board would be a Blackbird. Where the Traveler, the Traveler used to be a popular step up, but that was like 15, 20 years ago, and even as early, 10 years ago. But it had, very narrow nose and tail, lots of rocker, thinner rails, and since the advent of the Blackbird, it's kind of faded. And the Blackbird is a great step up because it's designed to get in the waves easy. It's designed to handle size and power. but it's not that challenging of a board to ride. It's actually it's a very easy board, and it's a great step up. Uh, but we're reintroducing the Traveler, calling it the new Traveler, and that'll be out in the next month. And that's for crew that travel to warm water spots where they're not wearing a wetsuit, so they don't have the extra 10 pounds, give or take. The waves are hollower. Waves are maybe faster, more power, and so the new Traveler, compared to the Blackbird, is narrower nose, a little bit narrower tail, a bit more rocker, um, and the bottom it's maybe a very shallow concave in the center, and it splits into a double barrel V that's not that deep. But that's the new Traveler. That would be a step up, but keep in mind it's typically when I designed it, it's for like more tropical locations. So maybe a Traveler that's 3 to 4 inches longer than your high performance shortboard or whatever, and then maybe a second Traveler, a second Blackbird, about another 3 or 4 inches longer, and then I was going to touch on the mid-lengths. Then you might want to look at a mid-length board, which is all the craze these days. To me, a mid-length is between 7 and 8 feet, but and I built some shorter, but I see other shapers promoting mid-length starting around 6'6". But the mid-length is, Torren Martin is an amazing surfer. I think he got most stylish surfer of the year, Surfer Magazine, 2019. But all his videos are very, I don't want to say soulful, but his surfing is amazing on the mid-lengths. And so we have the Egg, which how much time do we have?
A little under 20 minutes.
Yeah, I started out in the garage. I did a few hundred boards in the garage, and I got a job at GNS in '71. And my shaping bay was next to Skip Fry's, so I got to know Skip and surfed with him, and tried not his personal boards, but a couple of his. But he shaped me a couple of boards. So I've been on eggs for 50 years, and so we have the Egg, and we have the EggNot, which is a slight variation on the Egg in that it has a squash tail and a slightly more pulled in nose. And these boards have relaxed entries, but they have decent tail rockers. The older Eggs had flat, some of the Skip's boards were almost dead flat. But so we got the Egg and the EggNot, and we have a Big D, and the Big D, diamond tails. I love them, and we've kind of only had the Neil, I think, as a diamond tail. And so I started working on the Demon, which is a D minus short diamond tail, and crew are loving them. And then the Big D, which is basically a mid-length diamond tail, a little bit fuller. It's got a little bit more nose rocker. It's got plenty of tail rocker. It's got a really beautiful outline. So that's the Big D. So what I'm getting at is the mid-length board is a good, especially if you don't have a groveler. Mid-length might be something you might want to look at for days you want to cruise, do clean maneuvers, ride smaller waves, but you can ride bigger waves. I mean, some of Torren's barrels at Neos are mind-blowing. But the mid-lengths, I'm a much bigger surfer, so I've always ridden bigger boards, and I've always had bigger boards in my line. And you could argue that some of I have a category in my I have new high performance alternatives, longboards, wakeboards, accessories, archive boards, and I have big as a category. Desert Island, Zeppelin, Big Cat, Moby Fish, Yeti. And the Yeti, the Zeppelin is kind of a small wave cruiser. The Yeti is kind of a, I made it for me. It's kind of a big guy, gunnish board, and that could easily be turned. If I put one long box in and two side boxes, that could easily be qualify as a mid-length board. So what else have we got?
Well, we do have the EggNot in the shaping room if you want to go over there and show them.
Yeah, sure. All right. So this is the logo for the EggNot. It actually took quite a bit of work to get it right, but that's the logo. Could you hold it up for me so we can see the template? Maybe go back a little bit and move it a little bit more to there, right there. That's good. So the EggNot, you can see it's kind of an eggy nose, but the tail is not a wide squash, but it's a medium width squash, and it's available as a 2+1.
Yeah.
This one's a quad, but it'll also be available as a 2+1. And you put it back on the rack, put the tail down this way, bottom up.
Oh, bottom up.
Yeah. So the bottom is
Here, I can hold this and then if you want to show.
The entry starts out kind of it's not really a no Z, but it's release out here, and then as you come into the middle, it's pretty flat. And the shorter ones have a light concave. The heavier ones kind of have a slight break in the middle, and it starts to develop into concave. And this is what I call the sweet spot. The midpoint's here, the fins are here, and the sweet spot is somewhere in front of the fins, a little bit farther up on some boards, but it's generally in here. And I think you'll find it, myself and most shapers, that's the deepest part of the concave, or the deepest part of the V, or the deepest part of the double V, and then it starts to fall off. Still maintains, and as you come into the last 3 or 4 inches, the V flattens out, and it kind of almost is slightly rolled off the back of the board, and that's almost a universal finish. We're going to be doing a lot of tints on the mid-length boards, and very, very minimal logos. But this the EggNot, this one's a little beefy, but the EggNot in general is going to be a thinner profile, thinner rails. So I'm excited about that. We've had some guys test riding these and pretty psyched. So how much time we got left?
Where does it say?
Well, we probably got a couple minutes. Somebody got a question about Noel Salas and.
Okay, scroll up a little bit.
Oh, tell us about the new twin that Noel Salad rode in Waco a few weeks ago. Maybe it was a typo, Noel Salas. That's the thing is there's always always new surfers. There's always new shapers, and a lot of them think they're onto something new. And the fact of the matter is pretty much everything has been done. You know, like I said, my first board was an asymmetrical late 1966, you know, so. And, but the twin fin at Knoll Road isn't really new. It's pretty much, in my twin fins that I built for Sean and Josh Kerr and a lot of people in between really haven't changed much in 40 years. The more modern twin fin has a little bit more rocker. It has a light concave in the middle. We weren't really using concaves much in the early 80s. And I make them these days. I make them, you know, with a beak nose and with a regular tapered nose. And you know, what's the difference in a beak nose? You know, partially it's just aesthetics. But Noel's writing everybody's like saying, oh, we need a modern twin fin outline. You know, it's a little bit narrower than the fishes. And I've had them for 40 plus years. So that's what Noel was writing. I think he was writing like a 5. I'm not in front of my computer right now, but he's writing a 5'9". I mean, Noel's about 160 pounds and he's a good surfer. And you want to know his volume? I don't know, his volume's like under 27 maybe. But yeah, it was, you know, we have it. We have it in our line. We've had it forever. And like I said, I think my fin placement's a little bit different than other people's. Yeah, you got it, Salas.
Someone was wanting you to talk about rail thickness, I think. It's a little bit of ways up. Please talk about rail thickness. What happens if your rails are too thick?
If your rails, you know, that's a good question because before volume, you know, people, you know, when they're looking at buying a board in the shop, they used to put the board under their arm, and that's how they could tell, you know, thickness and the rail thickness. You could have boards that are, you know, quarter, 3/8 of an inch to 5/8 of an inch difference in thickness. But the rails could be the same. And then the opposite is true. You could have 3 boards of the very same thickness and have every rail feel different. A lot of it has to do with how the deck contour and how crowned the deck is or how flat the deck is. But if a rail's too thick, you know, the basic deal on a rail that's too thick is you can't get it in the water. You know, you try to turn it, it bobs and it won't sink. And if you can't get your rail in the water, then you can't utilize your bottom curve to do a good solid turn. And you know, you see guys. That's why you even see pros sometimes that you know, maybe a little bit bigger surf, but their boards are, you know, they're having a hard time getting the rail in the water. And vice versa, if your rail is too thin, you're going to bury the rail too deep, and you know, maybe in very, very hollow, very clean ways. Yes, that's good, but most of the time, you're going to be overpowering that rail. You're going to be sinking it too deep. You're actually going to be slowing your turns down and bogging, maybe not even finishing the turn. So yeah, the rail thickness is, you know, it's pretty important. And you know, I make a lot of flat deck models, concave models, and you know, guys order them like 2 3/4 thick, and I go, I can't do that because with a flat deck or a concave deck, you need to compensate about 0.25 inches in thickness because all the volume carries out to the rail. So the flat deck boards are a lot thinner, and somebody might order a board 2.5 inches thick. To get the volume that he wants, I have to do it 2.2 inches thick. So that's a whole different thing. And the rails on the flat deck boards are full, but they're angular, and so they have a pretty tight lower apex, and then they start to come up towards the deck, and they're not curved. They're kind of not flat either, but they're kind of angular, and I think that's a big difference in, you know, the boxy rails that I do, and I've done since the early 80s, even before Rocky. But
I think we got to wrap it
Yeah, I went a little bit over today because I started late. But anyways, we'll do this again in about 3 or 4 weeks. And thank all of you. Carter,
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. You guys have a good day. Take care.